Well, our next session is a session that almost everyone I know have been waiting for. But it is from an innovation activist, serial innovator. The Economist calls him Mr. Creative, and his ideas are known to break convention. Just to give you an example, here he is playing the piano while all of us were drinking tea outside, hoping that everyone's going to come in and settle down. So again, I just saw his approach, which is very, very fascinating. He recommends hiring a chief destruction officer in companies instead of a chief innovation officer. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. John Kao on disruptive innovation, a habit, a practice, a way of life. And I'd like to add that this is Mr. Kao's first visit to India, a trip he specially made to interact with all of us here. Thank you very much.
Namaste. So when I found out that I was invited to come to this meeting, I noticed on the calendar that it coincided with my birthday. And so I spoke with my family and I said, you know, I'm not sure I should do this because don't we have to celebrate my birthday in family style? And my children said to me, are you nuts? Of course you have to go to India and we'll celebrate your birthday whenever. So I'm happy to actually share this, you know, typically auspicious day with you because it also seems to me to be quite an auspicious day for the Indian business community. Business Today, to me, has put together a very interesting community. I've been enjoying very much the opportunity to get to know some of you earlier today and yesterday. And I think community is at the root of a lot of what we are here to talk about in terms of innovation. I also am quite intrigued by the guiding intelligence in the program this morning because you could argue that there's a kind of a almost a hierarchy of development where you have to cultivate your physical health and then you cultivate your psychological and emotional health, right? So that's our progression. In order to be able to cultivate our creative energies, to be able to do something to change the world in a hopefully productive way. And so that is actually a clue as to why I've spent the better part of 30 years professionally focused on the question of what is creativity, what is innovation, how do they work at the level of an individual, a team, an organization, and lately a society. You know, this whole notion of large-scale innovation is really my word for how we should be looking at innovation, not just as a corporate agenda, but as a societal agenda, as an agenda that affects all of us. Because we're at a moment in history where never before have the challenges before us seemed more complex, where in some respects this is not simply business as usual or business cycles as usual, but really kind of a discontinuity, where we stand on one side of a valley with a promised land before us, but we have to take the leap. And I'm sure that you as leaders of organizations, whatever your business is, can identify with that. How do we go from here to the future that we desire? And that is a journey that is powerfully influenced by innovation, which is why it's no surprise that innovation is one of the most talked about terms in the management lexicon, which I have to say is both a good thing and a bad thing. You know, if you go on Google and you do the analytics around how many times the word innovation has been searched for over the last 12 months, well, let me just ask you, what would your guess be in terms of how many times Google searches have been done for the word innovation over the last 12 months? Huh? A few million. Okay, any other guesses? No downside here, I'm just... a billion. Okay. So the answer the last time I checked, and this is one of my favorite metrics, was over 2 billion, which is the good news and the bad news. The good news is that people are concerned about innovation. They want to understand how they can get more of it into their lives, into their teams, into their organizations, into their countries. from my perspective, there are probably at least 50 countries around the world now that are focused on innovation as a national agenda and spending really good money on it, I might add. You know, China has pushed, by some estimates, $500 billion onto the casino table that's known as innovation. And I've advised about 10 countries over the last decade or so on innovation policy: Finland, Chile, Australia, Canada, Abu Dhabi, etc. They're all looking for the holy grail of innovation in some respects. But the problem is that the word is used so indiscriminately that it threatens to fade into almost meaninglessness, because we all have our mental maps with regard to what innovation is. You know, for instance, if I go and talk with a typical government, you know, Ministry of Economic Affairs type in whatever country, it's likely that they'll, you know, I'll say, how is innovation doing in your country? And they will say, well, it's fine because we are increasing our investment in basic science and R&D by 0.2% of GDP. And I say, well, that's very nice, but how about innovation? Because that's just one flavor. You know, it's almost like these days, if you remember Howard Johnson's and 28 flavors, there are at least 28 flavors of innovation. And so just using the word without a background or a context can create a lot more confusion. So if there's one thing that we can do together in our all too short time in this mode, it's to really align ourselves around a common definition and a common framework for thinking about innovation, talking about it, such that in the future, when you are in a conversation and someone says, well, we're really interested in innovation, you can ask the all-important question, what do you mean? Share your definition and hopefully have a good conversation. But this time that we have together is much more than that, and there's been a lot of back and forth in terms of long-distance telephone calls and emails to shape it. And so here's the menu. The menu is that I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so to share a point of view about innovation. So this will not be a long keynote, you know, me talking to you, you listening, but I will do that for a little while because I do have a few things to say about innovation and how it works. That point about how it works, by the way, is the key agenda. You know, there are a lot of people out there who can do what I call the hand-waving around innovation, right? Oh, innovation, it's so important. You need some. If you don't have some, you're in big trouble, you know. Did I say it was important? Here's the reasons why. But very few people can actually talk about how to do it unless they've had direct experience, for example, of leading an organization, in which case their experience is likely to be quite specific to them as a leader, to their organization, etc. So my happy life, I'm a pretty happy person, actually. I was relieved to hear the previous speaker talk about, you know, bliss and so forth and so on and say, well, you know, I'm pretty happy, is that I get to go around and talk with lots and lots of people who are in the hot seat to deliver an innovation agenda. You know, whether they're the Prime Minister of Finland, whether they're some entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, whether they're a CEO of a company, or this new species, which is somebody calling up and saying, I'm the new Chief Innovation Officer of my company. I've just been appointed. What should I do? Right? So I get to compare all of these experiences and integrate them into a picture of how innovation works. And because I've had myself, I mean, I'm the CEO of a company right now that I started 8 months ago. It's a venture-backed company to enable teenagers to be innovators and to make a difference in the world. I'm very big on moving the skills. You know, I spent 14 years teaching at Harvard Business School. That was a good experience. But I want to move that same pedagogical intensity to teenagers, right? So there's just lots of ways in which we can be talking about innovation. I want to present that context for you. The second part, this is a three-stage agenda, is I'm going to take your questions, and I'm going to listen to a bunch of questions, and then I will try to respond to them. We won't, you know, I'd like to get a number of questions, and then I'll kind of formulate a picture and try to respond, because ultimately this is for you. I mean, I'll be around during lunch. We can talk about specific stuff for you, but you know, if we can talk about it here, that would be really great. And then the final thing is we're going to do a little bit of workshop activity because I have a pretty efficient way of getting each one of you to think about how to design an innovation agenda for your organization. And you all have innovation agendas already. Some of you very explicitly, some of you less explicitly, but believe me, you have one. So the question then is, how can you power your innovation agenda up? What are the ingredients? How can we stimulate a thought process that you can take away with you back to your home base? Right? So that's kind of our ambitious agenda for our time together. Okay, so let's, if we can tee up the slides, please. Okay, so I want to start off with a musical metaphor. You may have noticed that I was doing a little piano there. I want to make a couple of points right off the bat. One thing is that none of those notes I played were written down. They were all kind of coming out of my improvisational ability, such as it is. I mean, I feel like a jazz student, not like a jazz piano player. But I've been playing piano since the age of 5, and music has become an important metaphor to me. I actually wrote a book called Jamming, which basically states what leaders can learn from jazz musicians. That is the thesis of the book, right? So how many of you, by the way, play music or play a musical instrument? So a few of you, okay. I have to explain to the rest of the folks here what you know, which is that there are two ways of making music. You know, one is you can go to the store and you can buy sheet music, right? And then you play the notes, or you can improvise. So sheet music is interesting. This is actually a piece by Chopin, and it's got a lot of, this is like the instruction set, the blueprint for the music, the dehydrated music. So it specifies the mood, it's agitato, right? MF is mezzo forte, which means loud but not too loud. And these little all these little black things, by the way, are notes. You know that. That's where you play, put your finger on the key and you play a certain note. And then these markings at the bottom here are the kind of pièce de résistance. I mean, it's the, it's the essence of sheet music, which is, you can't quite see it, but these little signs here say PED, which stands for pedal, as in pedal. And what the composer is telling the musician to do is, okay, here you put your foot on the pedal, and with the asterisk, that's where you take it off, right? So the sheet music is the control system communicating between the composer, who is very creative, and the musician, whose job is not to create new notes, but to play the notes exactly the way that Chopin wrote them, right? Which is the way it works in a lot of organizations. There are smart people up in the C-suite, and they compose the sheet music, and then everybody is supposed to play the notes the way they were written. Well, there's another way of making music, which is jazz, or Indian classical music is jazz, or jazz is similar to Indian classical music, which is there's a framework, but then the goal is to kind of go somewhere new. So just to play that out as a thought experiment, here's an old favorite tune by Oscar Hammerstein and Jerome Kern called All the Things You Are. Judging by the demographics in this room, some of you know this tune and probably loved it as much as I did. So if I went to the music store and I bought sheet music, like that Chopin piece, for All the Things You Are, and this is actually the sheet music, the dehydrated music, this is what it would allow me to do. I could play this tune this way. Pretty terrible, right? Dry, schematic, boring. But I don't know, maybe some of you liked it. I could play it again for you. I'll try to vary the expression. This is my freedom as a piano player, so I'll... You get my point. The point is that I have no freedom to create new notes. The jazz musician's job So right now I'm just playing the tune, but I'm dressing it up, obviously, a little bit. So hopefully it sounds a little better. So the real acid test of jazz is you take this melody and you go somewhere new. You make a new melody in the moment. So I'll just demonstrate this for you right now. Anyway, I could go on like that for hours. If we had more time, I would, do more performing, but we are here also to... Oh, here? Oh, really? Okay. I don't know if they want to see me better. They do, okay. Well, this is, it looks like a bullseye, though. It's making me a little nervous. I'm going to move all around the place. Okay, so... let me make a couple of points about what happened here. And by the way, I could talk for 2 solid hours about the skill set involved in improvisational music, which, by the way, it could be this kind of music as well, I don't know if that's an evening raga or whatever. I just kind of made that up. But, it's the same skill set, right? It has to do with mindfulness, which we talked about earlier this morning. It has to do with a balancing between your expertise and your open-mindedness, which, as leaders you understand completely, right? There are all of these tensions and paradoxes. It's about collaboration. It's about what the Zen Buddhists call beginner's mind, which is to free your mind from preconceptions so that new things can emerge. And I have discovered that the music sounds better when I'm not thinking about anything. The moment my brain, starts chattering away, I'm in India, I don't even know what time it is relative to San Francisco time. This is such a senior audience. I better play well because, I want to do a good job. And, I didn't quite play it that way. I better play it this way. The moment I start engaging in that internal dialogue, the music starts to sound bad, right? So getting to a position of mindfulness, which in a sense allows the prepared mind to generate new things that have a better chance of quality, is one of the key signature skills of creativity. All right, and it's a very rich topic for us to explore. But what I wanted to do was just to sort of demonstrate this, because none of those notes I played just now were written down. I didn't rehearse them. I wasn't thinking about them. This is a skill, right? So we're talking about innovation not as a wish, but as a capability. So, for example, I feel like I have to come down here. Let's say that I picked on. Well, you're on the phone. So let's say I picked on you and I said, you didn't realize this, but there's another part to my presentation, which is at the end, you're going to give a jazz piano concert. And I'm going to do everything that a good manager does. I'm going to make you believe you can succeed, and I'm going to give you instructions on where to put your fingers on the keys, and I'm going to make sure they keep this nice piano here, and everybody's going to stay because they already know that you're going to do this, and we're all going to applaud. Did I mention that I'll show you in the value statement where it says this is an important task, and there's no risk, and we support creative people, and what's my point? My point is that unless she has been practicing in secret for 10 years, maybe you're smart, so maybe 7 years, right? And you're doing this. Right? Or in jazz terms, diminished. And just getting that into your fingers, getting the skill into your fingers and playing those drills over and over again, you wouldn't be able to do it, right? So this is not about wishing, right? Jazz musicians, and Ravi Shankar didn't get up on stage and wish to play well or say, gee, I'd better get in the mood to play well, or somebody's got to encourage me to play well. I mean, jazz musicians get up on stage, they count off, and they play new notes that have to sound good. Or people will leave the jazz club and they won't buy the CD. So by the strict dictionary definition, this is innovation, right? Innovation is new content of whatever kind which satisfies some purpose to create value. So it's the creative part, but it's the value part as well, right? So, a lot of people say, oh, creativity, makes me nervous in my organization because it's like one person said to me, I don't like it because it's like giving people permission to overspend on an unlimited budget. Well, if I sit down and in musical terms I play whatever I feel like playing, that's very creative, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you go out and buy the CD, right? So I haven't created much value. I've demonstrated the ability to generate something that's novel. So you have to have newness and you have to have value that satisfies some kind of a purpose in order to have innovation. But the other point is you have to have the capability for doing it. Capability. And capabilities, as we know from the management literature, are skills that you practice over and over again to the point where you own them, right? They're hard to get and then they're hard to lose, right? So that's an interesting point because, to me, it's a question that I ask CEOs and senior managers all the time. So what are the capabilities for innovation you have in your organization? And the answer is often a blank stare. Well, we have a corporate value statement. We have a recognition program. We listen to our employees. We try to eliminate the downside of risk. But what are and I say, great, that sounds wonderful. That's all culture. Culture is not unimportant. But what do you actually have that's the equivalent of 10 years of scales? Or what Malcolm Gladwell referred to as the 10,000 hours, which gets you mastery, right? As opposed to simple skill. So these are just some examples of innovation capabilities. These may or may not be things you're interested in, but I just tried to put a list of examples together, right? So do you know something about user-centered design and prototyping? Do you have basic science skills? Do you know a lot about ideation and creativity skills? Do you have skills to develop an ecosystem of partners? How much do you know about digital innovation, which is very much around innovation collaboration? What about strategic foresight, which is so different from strategic planning? Most people, when I ask them, what is your strategy process, they say, oh, we spend a lot of time and we're here, and then we extrapolate into the future, and we spot our trends, and then we say, okay, 3 years, 5 years, we're going to be there. And I say, great, but what about foresight, which is different? Foresight is taking an imaginative leap into the future, and then looking back, and then saying, well, what would we have had to do to get here, right? It's like, if this were a different workshop, and I said, okay, let's pretend it's the year 2020, and Business Today is doing a cover story on India, right? India triumphant. Well, what is that story, and what would have had to happen to get there? And then how do we work backwards? It's just a different way of thinking, right? Then the whole notion of skunk works, accelerators, venture capital. I mean, I keep hearing in my conversations with people how there's a wish for more professional venture capital to support innovation at the grassroots. And I say that's great. There's the so-called valley of death from where you raise the initial angel money to where you have a sustainable business, which is, quite prevalent in the U.S., which is the most venture capital abundant society in the world, and I can only imagine it's the same thing here. And then what is the value added around venture capital? Is there a skunk works? Is there an accelerator? Is there a lean startup academy? What is there? What have you got? Educating for innovation. This has been a theme of my work for 30 years. You know, I always say if you want innovation, right, you have to have people who know how to do it. If you want people who know how to do it, you actually have to train them. And, you know, training people to be innovators is an interesting art form, right? I could say a lot about that as well. And then sustainability, right? So I'm doing a little advisory work for Generation Investment Partners, which is Al Gore's sustainability investment fund. And there are a lot of smart companies now that don't make a distinction between their innovation function and their sustainability function because they're really part and parcel of the same agenda.
If you could tell us from your experience, how much of innovation that has happened over the years is due to technological breakthroughs, and what is it, and how much is because of out-of-the-box thinking and doing things differently?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And back there.
Hi, John. This is Shipra. You mentioned that innovation is about talent. So how does companies invest, I mean, how can we make companies invest more in human capital to be more adaptive to innovation, or how do employees collaborate further? Any best practices would be helpful.
Okay. Good. Okay, we'll take one more. And then I'll try to make sense of all these
Hi,
questions.
John.
Hi.
My question is, the perception is that innovation is easier to come by in startups than in larger companies. So why is it so? Is it that larger companies get too trapped in systems, procedures, and processes so as to prevent people from thinking differently?
Yeah. Boy, these are such good questions. I wish we had all day, you know, because this is a very rich hall. Okay, well, let me work through these for you, and then if we have time, we can circle back. So on the can it be taught point, you cannot teach somebody how to be Mozart or Steve Jobs, but you can definitely teach them creativity skills, and you can definitely teach them skills of being an effective innovator in an organization and in society. A lot of the education, though, is not about sitting in a classroom and ingesting facts and then taking tests, which is the traditional model of education. So it's about project-based learning, it's about doing things, it's about seeing examples of people who've achieved things and people who've failed. So, for example, I taught a course at Harvard Business School for, I had a 12-year life. I had 2,000 students take it as an elective at Harvard Business School. And it was 30 classes on this stuff, and almost all the case studies were failures. Because you learn more from failures than from success in some respects. So, yes, it can be taught. Is it being taught? Not as much as I would like to think it should be. Which is partly why I started this Edge Makers company. I actually think that what I was teaching at Harvard Business School to 26-year-olds should be taught to 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds. Before society crushes their creative spirit and channels them in certain directions and gives them such a fixed idea about what they're supposed to do that they have to spend time unlearning what society tells them in order to create something different or new. And why shouldn't a 13-year-old be able to understand the rudiments of doing a startup or doing a design exercise or doing a brainstorming session? I mean, there's no reason why not. You know, I don't know how much time you spend with teenagers, but I spend a lot of time with teenagers these days, and I'm constantly energized by how open and how morally indignant they are about the condition of the world and how much they want to be engaged in trying to do something. So it's all the stuff, you know, we're talking about, purpose and confidence and everything else. The question of talent is an interesting one because, you know, I would make the argument that in societies, which is most societies, where education and the needs of the job market are increasingly misaligned, you have what I would call an invalid social contract, which penalizes young people. What do I mean by that? So you go to school and you do everything right, you get good grades, you check off all the boxes, you take all the tests, you succeed at all the exams, you get into a good university, and what happens in countries like China and Korea and much of Western Europe? You can't find a job. Why is that? Right? Why is that? It's because the things you learned were not so useful in terms of what the real world wants. Right? So if I'm an employer, you're all employers, what do you want? You want people who are proactive, communicate well, know how to sell their ideas, know how to generate new ideas, know how to collaborate with other people, know how to do a bunch of things that you could argue are kind of like 21st century skills, none of which is taught in secondary schools anywhere in the world. Right? That's why, in a sense, this idea of bringing these so-called advanced skills to secondary school is such an interesting idea, because why not, right? So, in China, my understanding now is that there are these tenement apartments where young people are living sometimes 5 or 10 to a room. They're university graduates. They can't find jobs. Their parents kill themselves to pay for their college education, and they're too embarrassed to go home. So they can't go backwards, they can't go forwards, they're stuck. And when you think about Spain with a youth unemployment rate of 57%, 57%, I mean, this is like a social cataclysm, right? And if you had given them entrepreneurial skills, a lot of them would be starting companies. In Silicon Valley, when there's a recession, what happens? People go to the garage and start companies because they know how, because there's this kind of industrialization of the innovation process in the Bay Area. It's like, okay, we can't get a job, but actually, who cares? We'll just go to the garage. Twitter, just went public a month or so ago. 1,600 Twitter employees are now multimillionaires. 1,600. Most of them are pimply 20-year-olds, right, who now have the money to quit and start their own company or back their friend or do whatever, right? So this notion of the invalid social contract means that, you can't blame companies. They want a certain, they want certain skill sets, and the schools are not producing them. So then the question for a company is, do you make versus buy? Well, are there ways that you can find raw talent and then develop it internally, for instance, right? I mean, there are all these thoughts about, what should your talent strategy be? What is your share of talent in your segment? What are you doing to develop talent and identify it and retain it, right? So, getting people in is half the battle, but then cultivating them is the more difficult set of tasks. Okay, national examples. Well, it turns out, at least in my opinion, that the countries that are good at innovation tend to be smaller, more agile countries, and maybe that's not so surprising because, a country like India is really complicated. America is complicated. China is complicated, right? Which is not to say that Israel, Singapore, Chile, New Zealand, are not complicated, but somehow the scale of operations is a little bit different. So, to me, there is no country out there that is the golden example. I mean, I would say America is leading the pack because America has a culture that forgives failure, applauds for weird ideas, and allows people to take a decent amount of risk, right? And when you think about that, that's probably America's one remaining absolute advantage. It's why people still flock to the Bay Area to start their companies, and to the U.S. in general, New York and other places as well, because you're in a milieu which supports the kind of work that you need to do, right? And if you fail, right, if it's a noble failure, people cheer, carry you out on your shield, right, all dead, and then give you money to do it again. So here's one little tidbit, which hopefully already is a little rebate on the value of your participation here, which is if you were ever in a position to raise money from a San Francisco-based venture capitalist, and they say, tell me about your biggest failure, the right answer is not to sugarcoat the answer or to push it away. The right answer is to tell them about the most spectacular, bloody, fall-on-your-face failure you personally experienced. Because what they want to know is what you learned from that, because they assume that failure is inevitable. There's a saying in Silicon Valley that if you have not failed at least once or twice, you're not trying hard enough, right? Which is a totally different attitude from every other society where if you go bankrupt or your company goes bust and blows up, I mean, Finland is, to me, a poster child for innovation, except if you go bankrupt, you never get a loan from a bank again, right? So it's a bit of a contradiction in terms. Okay, how to launch. I mean, this is a very rich list. So what I typically say is that there is no three-ring binder, right? So in other words, I can't give a standard set of instructions for all companies because every company is different. Just like in medicine, I did medicine for a while. I mean, every patient is different, right? Somebody walks in your office, everybody's got a head and, legs and eyes and stuff like that. So superficially, they look the same. But what do? Do you immediately start medicating them? No. You take a history, you do a physical exam, you do laboratory tests, and then you make a diagnosis, which is often wrong, right? And then you come back and you revise the diagnosis iteratively until you get to the right answer. It's the same thing with innovation strategies for companies. So I can give you the principles of how to design an innovation system, but I can't be prescriptive in terms of saying this is exactly how you do it. So, for example, there are some companies that have chief innovation officers and innovation teams, and that's a really good thing. And other companies where they have that, and that's probably the wrong thing because it makes the other people in the organization feel like they don't have to do anything. So the chief innovation officer becomes the person with the target painted on their back, and everybody else can just do business as usual. But whether it's a chief innovation officer or not a chief innovation officer, you need what I call stewardship, right? I don't like the word governance because it implies that there's the governing and the governed. But stewardship implies a more collaborative approach to handling the innovation agenda. So you think about the way an organization works. Typically, well, not typically, I mean, generically there are three levels. So you have the CEO. You asked, what is the role of the CEO? The role of the CEO, in my view, is kind of to be the chief innovation officer, but not at an operational level. So the job of the CEO is to have, it's to be the champion for a vision of the company, articulate that vision, authorize people to work on innovation agendas, provide resources, provide protection from interference with the day-to-day, and then basically get out of the way. It's like report back to me, right? So it's a pretty cushy job, right? Then you've got everyone else in the organization, right? So the bottom. And you want to make sure that there's a flow of ideas, but you want to be very careful about how you spell out expectations on both sides, because there is this classic problem called the suggestion, which I call the suggestion box problem. So imagine this is a company, and I say, we really like your ideas, and you're so talented, so please send your ideas, and we're going to go do great things. You're so great, send your ideas. And then every one of you sends 5 ideas, right? All of a sudden, I've got a suggestion box that's full. It's got 300 ideas in it. Well, likely as not, you're not going to do very much with all 300 ideas. You may not even send back a polite thank you so much for your idea. And what's going to happen next? People are going to be, less motivated than ever to step forward and do something. So you have to handle that internal communication extremely carefully. But the most important level in the organization for operationalizing innovation is what I call the middleware, or the coalition of the willing. So whether it's an innovation team or a council or a cross-functional, whatever, right? Someone or some group has to own the agenda of formulating the innovation strategy, making sure it's cool with the CEO, making sure that expectations are managed, and then doing it and learning from that, and then iterating, right? And being responsible for taking the ball and running with it. And designing that stewardship function is probably the most important one of the most important initial steps, because from that comes an innovation strategy, which is, by the way, nothing more or less than we're going to spend this, we're not amount of resource, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that, here's how we're going to measure our success, etc. On the question of metrics, there are a lot of metrics, and there are no standard metrics yet, but the typical ones would be percentage of revenue from new products, amount of investment in R&D, amount of investment in innovation activities, right? Because a company might say, well, we're doing all this incremental stuff, but we're going to have one or two big bets. And the big bets are actually going to cost a lot of money, and you can obviously track how much you spend and then what the return on investment is. I would suggest there are a lot of other metrics, so it really depends on what your organization needs to focus on. You know, someone said service businesses. Well, service businesses are about retention of personnel, right? So what are the metrics around attracting and retaining talent, right? And do you have a talent metric, you know, within your organization? But another, you know, like a manufacturing organization might need something quite different. You know, they might need to track projects and how many of them come to fruition and what the biography of the project portfolio is, right? And that takes us to the question of reward. So creative people, just as a gross generalization, it's not that they're not motivated by money. There is this fiction out there in the behavioral science, in the management field, that creative people are motivated by, you know, internal, you know, existential, you know, I want to create something great, and that instrumental motivation doesn't really matter to them. It's ridiculous. You know, I mean, human nature is such, you know, if I'm creative and I'm valuable, put it in my paycheck, right? However, creative people are also motivated by other factors, and those other factors are subtle, right? So if you're not so experienced with that creative culture, you might miss all this. What are they motivated by? They want to be with other people who are as good as they are, so that they have people to learn from. They want to be in a place where they can do their best work. They want to be in a place where they have the best infrastructure, so they don't have to waste time. Right? And if you can address those three needs, you're way ahead of the game, right? It's like you'll be they'll think of you as a mind reader. And a lot of the work that I've done to design environments for hot teams has really focused on those kind of intangibles, and down to the details of what's the physical environment. You know, I mean, what's the interior design? What's the workflow? And, you know, it creates problems often. You know, sibling rivalries. You know, Apple, there was a famous one where they had the Apple II division, which was making all the money, and then Steve Jobs decided to create the Macintosh division, which was spending all the money. And he gave the Macintosh division a grand piano in the lobby of the building, and he gave them a massage therapist and so forth. And the Apple II people were furious. It's like, we're doing all the work, we're making all the money, and you're treating all these people so nicely. And they put a pirate flag on top of the Macintosh people. And he said, look, you know, you're doing a great job. I got to treat them different, because, you know, they're taking the leap of faith. They're trying to create something insanely great that no one else has done before, and so I have to manage them differently. And so it's almost like being a parent in a way, right? It's not that there's one right way to manage your teams, right? I mean, so you've got the precocious 9-year-old who's so smart and, you know, but makes his 15-year-old brother really upset, but the 15-year-old's doing a really good job. You have to give both of them what they need, which is going to be different. So you have to have a theory of motivation that, you know, is going to be suitable. All right, so we've done that. We've done that. We're going to do this. We've done this. We've done that. We've done that. Culture, well, so incremental versus disruptive, I think that's just a fundamental point. You know, Clay Christensen famously wrote about the innovator's dilemma. It's not really a dilemma. It's more like a creative tension, right? It's like, do I focus on improving an existing game that I play well, or do I start a new game that requires a new way of thinking? So, if you're in the car business, at least in the old days, you'd make a car with big tail fins, and then no tail fins, and then tail fins with little red circle lights on them. And this was all to create variation to maintain demand, but it was incremental innovation on a known formula, right? So then the question becomes disruption, right? And so now you have a Mercedes that comes in and actually flirts with the idea of not selling cars, but renting the service of having a car, right? So you subscribe to Mercedes, and you get to pick a car, and it comes to your, anyway, it never happened, but they were flirting with that idea. So the truth of the matter is that every company is both in the incremental innovation business and the disruptive innovation business. The question is how you blend them together so that they're balanced. And it's very easy to get them out of balance, right? So there are famous cases of companies that drank the Kool-Aid and hired some innovation consultant and started doing lots of, out-of-the-box initiatives, and then wound up losing their handle on their core business to their detriment. But so it's a balancing act, and a lot of the art of innovation is about finding what jazz musicians call the sweet spot between structure and freedom, between what you know and what you don't know, and between incremental and disruptive, so that somewhere in between, that and this is jazz, is something that sounds really good that actually is different and interesting and potentially valuable in the marketplace. All right, so we did this. We did failure. We talked about metrics. Startup versus incumbents. Okay, this is an interesting point. We're almost done with this list here. So there's a very famous article in the literature called "Evolution and Revolution as Organizations Grow" by a guy named Larry Greiner. And what he said basically is organizations go through almost like a dialectical series of, tensions and resolutions. Okay, so one of the first ones is, when you start up, and for those of you that have been in a startup, right? You're sitting around, you've got some crummy office, you're there all the time, you love your partners, or it's emotionally intense, and it's very flat, and it's informal. Totally, kind of porous, open system. But then you have a problem, which is, well, who's doing what? I guess you'd better do marketing, and I'll do, technology, right? So you start to differentiate roles, right? Which then leads to a crisis of coordination, right? And then you have to develop processes for dealing with handling complexity, et cetera, et cetera. So look, most of you are in established organizations. You got to make sure the lawyers keep you out of trouble. There's regulation, there's government stuff, there's a million things that you have to worry about that you didn't have to worry about in the startup mode. So the ratio between the things that you have to focus on for tomorrow versus the things you have to focus on for today shifts dramatically as you evolve and become more complex. This is just the sad fact. It's like entropy. You can't revise the laws of physics. So then the question becomes, okay, now you're General Electric, or you're Apple for that matter, Apple Computer, with zillions of employees and operations around the world. How do you keep that spark, right? That's the big challenge, and the answer is not obvious. It could be, and the classic mode is you become a hybrid organization. This is my terminology. You become a hybrid organization where you basically create a parallel organizational structure that some people would call a skunk works, a place where you can go out and do the work of innovation by replicating the feeling of being in a startup, and which is not attached to the mainstream company, right? That is one way to kind of overcome. When IBM created the PC, they got this guy, Phil Estridge, and he came into corporate headquarters, and they said, here's a blank check, go away. And he moved to Florida, and he set up this whole PC division down in Florida, and then they swallowed it back in, but after it had matured. And if they had built it inside the company, it probably would have been a failure because there would have been too many things to worry about in terms of the today organization, right? So the challenge, in a way, is how to be both a startup and an incumbent when you get to that bigger scale. The question of is technology and innovation, is technology synonymous with innovation? It seems to me that one of the things that we're seeing now is the emergence of lots and lots of interesting companies that have almost nothing to do with technology. They're low tech or no tech, or they may have some internet flavor to them. But like, for instance, my Airbnb. You familiar with Airbnb? So Airbnb started off just 4 or 5 years ago. There were a couple of graduate students in San Francisco, and there was a conference. Nobody could get a hotel room. So they said, well, we'll rent out our living room, and they put it on Craigslist. And they got a lot of people saying, well, we'll pay you $30 to sleep on your sofa. And they thought, oh, well, you know, that's interesting. So they decided to start inviting people to list, you know, their living room, their garage, their basement, whatever, right? So fast forward to today, Airbnb doesn't own any of these properties, but it is using the excess capacity in society, basically, and they're on track to having as much inventory to rent out on a given night as Hilton International. They have 200 castles. They rented out the Principality of Liechtenstein. They have tree houses in Botswana. I mean, it's actually very cool what they've done. And of course, these guys are now stinking rich, and the company is very successful. But you think about what they did, it had nothing to do with disruptive technology or, you know, not even very much engineering. It's just a darn website, right? But the insight was that there was an enormous amount of value to be created by harnessing excess capacity in society, right? So it doesn't have to be disruptive technology. It has to do, these days, with insights into what people want, but where they can't necessarily tell you what they want, the tacit knowledge. So they have to, you know, rely on you to be very smart and to make inferences about what is desirable. Okay, so I think we have about 20 minutes left, 20, 30 minutes left. 15 minutes. Well, I don't want to shortchange these people on the exercise, though. So, but we could probably make it a little speedier. Okay, so let's hand out the materials. Each one of you is going to get a handout, and I will explain how we can do this in 15 minutes. And 5 minutes? Well, look, I hate to be the person in between you and lunch. On the other hand, this is really the heart of what I have to give you. So if you can give me, let's say, 20 minutes. Okay, then you're going to get 100% of the benefit. And if you're hungry, I won't take it personally if you want to go out and eat. Okay, so what I'm passing out is a framework. It's basically, you know, it's what you and others asked for, which is what are the elements of an innovation agenda, right? So can I have one too, so I can remember what I said I was going to do here? So let's see. So the first part of this, you'll notice on the second page and the third page, it's really a list of 18 elements of an innovation agenda. And these are, you know, my experience is that these are important topics to consider if you want to create an overall approach for your company or for a country. And they're presented in alphabetical order so that I'm not editorializing about which one is important compared to the others. So what I'd like you to do first, let's say for 5 minutes, is to just take a look at those 18 topics and the associated questions. Pick 2 or 3 that you feel your organization is good at. You know, you could just circle them. It's quite simple. I have a flashcard version of this, but you know that requires more time. And also pick 2 or 3 that represent gaps in your organization that you feel in your gut. Wow, we really don't have that, and that might be a problem. So let's reflect on this in silence. Okay, let's be quiet. This is a great opportunity for you to do that rare thing. Just think and reflect for a moment. Let's take a few minutes, review the 18 agendas and their questions, pick 2 or 3 that you feel are strengths, and pick 2 or 3 that represent gaps. I'll play a little music while you reflect. So when you're done with this first part, what I'd like you to do is to pick a partner for the second portion of this, preferably somebody that you don't know. And as a team of 2, decide who's going to go first, who's going to go second. So the person who goes first will talk about your responses to those questions that we just asked you to think about, i.e., which are the ones your organization feels are strengths and gaps. You present them. The other person should listen in an open, reflective manner, reflective as in, I'm going to reflect what I hear from you, right? Non-judgmental, make a few comments, and then you switch roles. And we'll just do this quickly, but it's to give you really an opportunity to express to someone else, get some feedback, and then also listen to somebody else's issues. So let's do that when you're finished with the reflection portion, and then we'll roll on to the final piece of this. Obviously, you're still reflecting, which is probably a good. It's either good or it's dangerous. I can't really tell you which. I think we're actually right on schedule. We're scheduled to have another 15 minutes or so anyway. So apologies for your grumbling stomachs. Yeah, so circle 2 or 3 in each of those categories, and then when you're ready, pick a partner and have your conversation, and then we'll come back to the center for the last piece. If you haven't paired up with somebody else, you should do it now so that we get you to lunch. So we'll take another minute or two, and then you should switch partners so that you both get a chance to present. Okay, hopefully you're now on the second round of the second person presenting. We'll take another 2 minutes for that, and then we're going to move on. When you're done with this exercise, the last thing that I'm going to ask you to do is once again return to solo mode and ask yourself the question, which are the 2 or 3 parts of this 18-item list that you will actually focus on when you get back to the office? What is it that you now see that you might actually do? And try to be as specific as possible in terms of what you're going to do, who you're going to do it with, what the timing is, the resources required, or whatever. So this is sort of like the action planning part. So when you're done with the dialogue, just take a few minutes to try to formulate your own individual action plan for innovation in your organization based on the discussion you had in this 18-item list. And the purpose of this is really to give you what was requested a few times, which is a framework and a way to think about this, but also to give you a checklist of things that you might want to take back with you to the office. So let's take like 3 minutes for reflection and just to bring these conversations to a close. Sorry, we have to truncate this a little bit, and then I want to just take a couple of minutes at the end to make some concluding remarks. It's the last item on the list, is just think about what you'd like to do for your own action plan. Based on surveying these 18 factors, what are 2 or 3 things you might actually work on, and how specific can you be about what you would do? Okay, I have about 1 more minute, and then we're going to shift gears. Okay, I'm going to suggest that you continue this thought process on your own. You've got the handout and you can take it with you. Also, I'm going to be hanging out at least for the first part of lunch, so if you have specific questions for me, I'm just going to hover around, and please feel free to ask whatever you'd like to ask. I just want to close with two final observations, and this will just take a couple of minutes. One is, part of the reason that I'm optimistic about the future of innovation as a field is because of all of this youthful energy that's coming into the world that is becoming sophisticated about innovation, digital technology, entrepreneurial skills in a way that has never before been possible historically. One of the kids we're working with now is an she's 9 now, but at the age of 8, she saw photographs of child slaves in Nepal, and she was very upset, and she said to her parents, "I'm going to end child slavery." And her parents said, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to sell my lemonade." And they said, "Well, you know, you're going to have to sell a lot of lemonade to solve this problem." And she said, "Well, I'm going to free 500 child slaves." And 500 means $125,000 because it costs about $250 per kid if you make donations to the appropriate agencies. Because a lot of the kids are just indentured, you know, you can buy their contracts out. So she started selling lemonade, sold lemonade. And then Nicholas Kristof, who's one of the senior editors at the New York Times, tweeted about her to his 1 million followers. And then people started showing up and dumping their wallets into her basket, and she reached her goal in 6 months. And her parents then said, "Well, you know, you can stop now. What do you want to do?" And she said, "Is child slavery done?" Remember, this 8-year-old girl. "Is child slavery done?" And they said, "No, sorry, it's not." And she said, "Well, I'm not done." So she continued to raise money. She's now raised over $1 million. She was given the opportunity to ring the bell at the Twitter IPO because Twitter obviously had enabled her to have great effect in the world as now a 9-year-old in a way that was never possible before. So this is why I'm optimistic, because I'm a big believer in the young as a vanguard for innovation. And you know, it's hard for us to explain a little bit of what we do. And we had an intern who at the time was 16 named Brianna. This is Brianna. And she came in one day and said, "Well, I know you're thinking about how to tell the story of what you're doing. I made a movie. Would you like to see it?" So this is the movie that Brianna made, which I want to share with you by way of a closing.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I decided to challenge myself and make an animation about edgemakers.com. I wanted to describe EdgeMakers and give people a good idea on how to use it. I really hope you enjoy it. EdgeMakers.com is where you can take creativity, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, invention, and design and make something substantial out of them. Being an edgemaker means becoming someone who's willing to use the skills and knowledge that they have to better their life, community, or maybe even world. No longer are teens going to be a mere speck in the world. No, they're going to become something much greater. It's about becoming people part of this world like anyone else, and not wait till you're 18, 20, or even 30. It's time to contribute to this world. Age is insignificant. EdgeMakers helps kids take something as simple as an idea and make it into something substantial, something else you grow and develop over time on the site to become something much more. The EdgeMakers community helps you become part of something greater than yourself. EdgeMakers is where you can find a community of people willing to collaborate, give feedback, and support throughout a journey. Not only will you be able to share your very own projects, you'll get a chance to see what others are doing beyond just one nation. It will allow you to see inspirational projects developing across the world. EdgeMakers is where you can find a new way of learning. It will provide the skills and knowledge to take what you already know and make use of it. We're living in a world where tools like the internet are more significant than anything. We can't wait for the education system to catch up to what we need right now. And it's important that teens make use of all the world has to offer. EdgeMakers.com is a tool anyone can use to really do something incredible.
So if children can do this, what about us, is what I say. And every day I get inspired by the example of these kids. And I want to put, you know, the most powerful tools I can into their hands, which is my personal mission these days. So I recognize that we've covered a lot of territory. This has been an ambitious agenda. We're actually right on schedule by the schedule of the workshop, but I apologize for keeping you from your lunch. this is a big deal. It's not a small deal. So it really is, in a sense, opening up some windows and going, hopefully, beneath the surface a bit. But you've got a bit of a kit now to begin to think about how to take this exploration of your innovation agendas further. And as I said, I'm going to be around. I'm happy to answer questions. Also, if I can just get the last slide back up. If you want to, I have plenty of publications on stewardship, on how to do an innovation agenda. Just send me an email, and you can follow me on Twitter if you like, because I do talk about what I'm seeing out there in the world of innovation. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. Good luck with your innovation agendas, and thanks for showing me a great time in India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I'm sure all of us are pretty motivated to go out there and become chief destruction officers. I don't know, why didn't you mention to us earlier that it's your birthday today? So, a very happy birthday. We've organized for a little cake, which we'd really appreciate if you could cut it, and play happy birthday for yourself on the piano. Sorry, we would have asked someone else to do that, but there is really nobody here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John.
Thank you. Good cake. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again. It was a pleasure for all of us to have you here.